Yeah, plenty on the show today. It's Maria in for Damien. He'll be back with you tomorrow. Something else that I'm going to be talking about is when you get older. Do you know, like, things like where you'd like to be cared for, what form that care would take, and all those things that we kind of don't think about when we're younger, or maybe our parents are there and they're going like, but I don't want this and I don't want that, or you know that they don't want this and they don't want that, but they never said it to you at the time. And are there any steps that you can take to make sure that you're not caught in a situation that a lot of people get into when they have an older relative, in terms of decisions that can be made and everything? So we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on. It'll be of interest to some of you, no doubt. And if you remember last week when I was covering for Damien, we were talking about how some employers treat job applicants. Well, there's two sides to every story, and I'll be getting the other side this morning. But I'm joined in studio, first of all, this morning by John Halligan, former Waterford TD and Minister of State. Good morning. How are you?
Minister for State.
Still there.
I'll be there for a while, I think.
Yeah, you could be there for the foreseeable, the way things are going, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later on. But I just want to talk first of all about the latest tranche of funding for the North Quays. It is a step forward and a welcome one.
It is, yeah, and that comes from the National Transport Authority. I think it's 15,175,000, something like that. A lot of that will be, I think 12 million is earmarked for the Dock Road and Abbey Road. That's to do access into the North Quays. And of course, the Greenway Fund, another 1.5 million for the Greenway in Bilberry. Which had been asked for by the council here, and then $1 million for sustainable transport in the city, which would probably be cycle lanes and so on. So it's a great step forward. It's on top of the $6 million that had been allocated for the footbridge. I think part of that again will go towards the footbridge. Talks are continuing with various departments, with the Department of the Environment through Owen Murphy, and I met him with other TDs there a few months ago. And also, of course, the Transport Department with Shane Ross. So I believe and I expect that there will be a substantial announcement, a very big announcement shortly, with more substantial funding towards the North Quays. It's a project now that's on the move, has been given the go-ahead for the government by the government, the last government. Well, they are still the present government, and I think it's...
Is that in any danger whatsoever?
No,
from the next government?
Oh no, I wouldn't think so. I think it would be folly on any government that would come to power now to interfere with that, and it will now be up to the four representatives that we have elected here to make sure that whatever government does come to power follows through on the commitments that they did make. And in fairness to that government, they did make commitments, and they made commitments that was one of the big projects in Ireland. And the first funding, even though people saw it as small, relatively small funding, the 6 million, it was the highest amount that was given anywhere in Ireland. And now you have substantial funding coming again. And I know it does require further funding from the government, but it would be unlikely for any government, having invested nearly 20 million already, not to come up with the funding that's required by the developers. And I've met the developers on a number of occasions.
What do they think about all of this? Do they think we should ever hurry up? We want to get on and get cracking and doing the thing.
I found it, Maria, that, and I think any reasonable politician will tell you, it's not always easy to walk in and say, can I have 10 million for this? Can I have 5 million for that? It doesn't work like that. There's a process you go through. There's a business plan must be put there before, because remember, this is taxpayers' money we're spending, and when you spend taxpayers' money, you got to get value for buck. So, and I think the developers, and I met the developers last year with the Taoiseach and the Minister for Pascal O'Donoghue, who I spoke to the other night, and Rob Cass at the time, and the Taoiseach and Pascal O'Donoghue accepted that this was one of the big projects in Ireland that had to, first of all, be given the go-ahead and then be substantially funded.
Because it's been a little bit like Waterford's Brexit, like everything is stalled, waiting on this, and nobody knows what's going to happen.
Yeah,
but now there's a light at the end of the
tunnel.
tunnel.
You're right on that. And I mean, like, it's been kind of it's been traumatic for people who kind of believe that, look, this is what we need for Waterford. And I'm always making a point, and I've made this point, that it isn't only for Waterford, it's for the South East, and this has the backing of politicians in Kilkenny, Wexford and so on, all in the South East region, because it will create employment for the whole region. It will bring footfall from other areas, and there's a spin-off of smaller companies and subsidiaries in places like Kilkenny and Wexford for whatever is built there. And I think that once that was recognised, and once you had all of the TDs and public representatives and councils on board from the area that there was no way that it wasn't going to go ahead.
So there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, well, you can see now that there's more money after being, and I believe that there will be, there are indications, and this will be up to the other politicians to do this, but I believe that there's substantial further money on the way.
Excellent. So we'll be waiting with bated breath to hear that. Are you missing the cut and thrust of everything? Because I haven't spoken to you since you gave it up.
No, absolutely
would
not.
you like to be involved in all the machinations
I wouldn't.
going
I
on
was involved. I made a point, and I've said this everywhere I went. I'm 40 years in politics. I made this decision 4 years ago. My staff would have known this when I was elected last time, that when I reached 65, I was out the gate. I don't want to be catching up with my ghost in a few years' time, running up and down to Dublin and not wanting to do the other things I want to do. I've had a couple of job offers. I'm thinking about them. I may not take up anything for about 6 or 7 months and just relax. No, I am watching it, obviously, and I am a minister, and I still go to Dublin and I meet government ministers and I speak to them regularly, and I've been speaking to Fine Gael in particular on the negotiations, or the lack of negotiations that are taking place.
Do you think it would be sort of stupid for Fine Gael to get involved? Because whatever about the number of seats that they got, they didn't. People wanted change. That is obviously the message from this.
I think,
so if you were Fine Gael, would you head off to the
No,
to
I
the
would. I'd go to the back benches now, and I think that's what they want to do. They were told by the people, that's what we want. If you look at, I mean, even those that won their seats won in reduced majorities. The Taoiseach coming in on the 5th count, I don't think he deserved that. I think he was a decent guy. Pascal O'Donoghue, who I think was excellent. Simon Coveney, one of our best foreign ministers we've ever had. But people said no. You might think the economy is going well, but it's a personal economy that's not going well for me. But I also think they gave that message to Fianna Fáil. I canvassed for Shane Ross for a week. Shane Ross is a personal friend of mine before I went into politics. And I remember going into areas where nobody would even consider, you couldn't mention the word Sinn Féin. And they said, we don't like Sinn Féin, but we're voting for them. We want Fianna Fáil and we want Fine Gael out. And I think there's an onus and responsibility now in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to recognise that. I don't agree that they're not speaking to Sinn Féin. They're a party that have accumulated over 500,000 votes in the election. At the very least, if you don't want to go into government with them, that's fine, and they have that right to do that. But at least sit down and speak to them. Have a look at their policies, their housing policies, their foreign policy, the policy in education, and say, look, we can't match up this with you. But they're not even doing that, and I think that's an insult to the people of Ireland.
But the thing about coalitions is that to me they're always on a hiding to nowhere, because nobody gets to do what they want, what they campaigned for and what they want to do. They might get bits of it here and there, but they have to concede in some way, and they have to compromise in some way. And I think that they're never as successful as if there's one party who controls everything.
No, and you're right in that, and history has shown that. The problem we face now is that there's a diversity of political view in Ireland, and that has come to pass, I believe, since the banking crisis, where very, very many people, more people became politicised, particularly young people who said, I cannot, and if you go back to the famous James Connolly always made a point that every social issue inevitably becomes a political issue. And people began to believe this and say, well, the only way I can affect this or change this is by becoming involved in politics or having a say. So you see a vast number of young people politicising themselves, which is brilliant, and deciding that our future is in politics because it has to be, and we're going to start voting and we're going to start making a mark. And they started to do that in the abortion referendum. They done it in the same-sex marriage. I mean, I think I was on with you, Marie, at the time. I collected my stepson from the train in Dublin at the 6 train, I think it was. It was jam-packed with people coming back into Waterford to vote. That's how politicised people have become. And a lot of them have said, we want to change. We don't want the parties of old. It's tired politics. We want to try something.
But is it possible for everybody, bar Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, to make up a government?
No, I don't think it is. I think there's such a diverse view and different ideologies within the left-wing groups, and which has always been the case. We're probably the only country in the world where we really don't have a left-wing party that you can say is a socialist party. We have smaller parties who even disagree with one another. Some would say Sinn Féin are not socialists, some would say they're not Republican, some would say they're Republican, some would say they're too nationalist. So you have all these arguments going on. So I think it would be quite impossible to like, how could you bring with the views, we'll say some of the views from the Rural Alliance on climate change. I mean, what's his name, one of the Healy Rays says that this is directed by God. Nuts. Yeah. How are you going to kind of align with him in government, with Sinn Féin or the Green Party? That wouldn't be possible. So I think that it's going to be extremely difficult. My view is that something will form because people want it, but I think you're facing an election within a year. I think whoever comes together will not be able to do it.
Because it's the one time, John, that I feel sorry for politicians when they're trying to do these negotiations. Because take, for example, Fianna Fáil. A lot of people voted for Fianna Fáil because they said they wouldn't go into government with Sinn Féin and they wouldn't talk to...
Yes.
And now they're expected to change their mind for the good of the country. But if you voted for them for that reason, then you feel betrayed. So they really are between a rock and a hard place.
But they are, and I think, I think the parties have to be very careful here. Essentially a message, and it's all very well for Fine Gael to be saying, but we got a percentage of the vote of Fianna Fáil and our percentage together is more than Sinn Féin. But I think essentially people said from all walks of life, if you look where the voting pattern was for Sinn Féin and the smaller parties, right across in Waterford here, everywhere, anyone that could vote, whatever social impact society was having on them, they made a decision. We don't want Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Now, I think if they were to come together, I think that would really annoy the electorate. They would say, we did not vote for this, but some government has to be formed. A government has to be formed. We have crucial Brexit negotiations. I'll be in Brussels next month on that again, taking place that could have dire consequences for our country. Boris Johnson seems to be changing his mind, gone all the way from the withdrawal agreement now to a hard Brexit, which will have an effect on Ireland. We will need a government in place sooner or later. And I think people will probably have to row back on this red line issue. We won't talk. But I would urge, and I have said this, and I've said it to people I know in Fine Gael. I haven't spoken to anybody in Fianna Fáil. They need to sit down with Sinn Féin anyway. I think they should. They should sit down with them.
But I suppose that's a good point. How do you know if you can work with somebody if you don't even sit down and try and thrash it out?
Yeah, and this idea that, we can't trust them, we're going back, this idea of being shackled by your past. I always believe this idea. Believe your past and don't forget about your past, but don't be shackled by it. I mean, if you go back into the history of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, there's a military history there, all the way back. So I think they've got to put this aside. Put this aside and sit down and talk about ideology with Sinn Féin, talk about their housing policy, their education policy, their foreign policy. And
do your jobs, basically.
And they may find, we can come to terms. And it's all about compromise. I'm sure if Sinn Féin decide, which they do want to go into negotiations, that there will be compromise on their part as well. They want to go into government. Now, if you have a problem with Sinn Féin and you say they'll do this, the best thing to do is put them into government. Let them go into government. They may be poor, they could be excellent, but keeping them out where over 500,000 people said we want them in, that's not sustainable long term. Sooner or later, and I will tell you this, if Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael get together and you have Sinn Féin as the main opposition party, I think the economy is going to take a little downturn in the next couple of years because of what will happen with Brexit, and it happens in economic circles anyway. Well then, the next election, I don't think Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael will be looking forward to it.
Politics is a funny thing, isn't it? Because Fine Gael put all their eggs in the Brexit basket, but most people on the street don't much care.
I think it's regretful in a sense, but I can understand
Brexit,
it.
But it is very important to us.
It is very important to us, and I can understand it. I mean, I do the negotiations with the funding for the SMEs. Our SMEs are some of the best performing SMEs in Europe, and I go regularly to Brussels to do that, and we've been able to access about 800 million funding for SMEs. But people don't see the relevance of that. Because that's not impacting on me at home where I'm trying to pay childcare. I'm paying high rent in an apartment, or my daughter is on the homeless list. And I think that was missed by the big parties. It was really missed by the big parties. That it's like, I give the analogy, you can put somebody who owns a business can take all these workers in a room and say, you're all on 80,000 a year. Don't bother me now, you have a great job. But if you dig down deep to the individual, the mortgage they're paying, the credit union loan they're paying. They may have a little bit of debt. They may have children going to university. They may have to drive to work and so on. That 80,000 is eroded, and that kind of what you call being a good salary ends up after tax not being such a good salary. I was just talking to Liz outside there. I was talking to a couple from Dublin, a young couple that I know very well. The two of them have very, very good jobs, really good jobs, top jobs. In the financial sector, one of them is working, and in IT, the other. But after tax, they're paying $1,850 for their apartment and $1,600 childcare. Sure, that's not sustainable for the quality of life for people. They said, we voted left, John. We voted left. We voted just to stop Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And they're going to have to get that message that the economy is a personal economy for people.
Though having said that, there was a joke during the rounds before the election. I'm sure you came across it. And it's this bloke goes up to heaven. And St. Peter's at the gates of heaven, and he says, "Come in, you're welcome. Come into heaven." And your man says, "I think I just want to check out hell, just so I can check out hell, okay?" So off you go. Come back when you're ready. Goes down to hell. Hell is a fantastic place. It has everything. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. And he says, goes back up to St. Peter, and he says, "St. Peter, thanks very much and everything, but I'm going to go to hell, okay?" Okay, off he goes down to hell, and the devil's at the gate going, and it's proper hell with flames and pain and everything. And he says, what happened to the hell he was in yesterday? He says, yesterday we were campaigning, today we're elected.
Well, that's brilliant. It's brilliant. And I suppose finally it's a very good point you make, because it's interesting. I knocked at the door in Dublin. As I say, I was canvassing for Shane Ross, and just chap and his wife came out and said, "We have really good jobs, but we're voting Sinn Féin." And I said, "Do you mind me asking you why? You're entitled to that if you want." I said, "Fine. Look at the promises," he said, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. He said, "It's laughable. It's absolutely appallingly laughable."
But they all do it.
They do. And like his point was, some of the stuff they're talking about, they had 10 years to do, or they had 9 years to do it. It's not as easy as that. I think housing, I'll guarantee you, if people think you'll be able to solve the housing crisis in a year or 2 years, that's not going to happen, Maria. I know by being there. And it is a crisis, there's no question about that, and we really need to up the ante on it. But if people think that if Sinn Féin go into government for 4 years, that all of a sudden rent is going to come down, childcare is going to be fine, housing is going to be fine, our foreign policy will be fantastically regarded around the world, it takes a lot of time. And I think you find that when you go into government. It's
like I said to you before, it's like the health service. Anyone who could fix the health service would have fixed it. It's the biggest bugbear in Irish politics for years.
It is.
So if it was fixable, somebody would have fixed it.
You see, I think the problem is that politicians don't have time. I remember speaking to one of the ministers, and I said to him, inevitably somebody is going to have to grab the HSE and disband it and start from the beginning. Bring experts from outside. I've always said it. Look at the Israeli health system, the system in Finland, the system in Cuba, the system in France. Bring in experts to see, no, that's too dicey because we could have a year of hell. So what will we do? We'll say we're going to put another billion in or 2 billion in. And if you look at I still think we have the highest amount of managers in the health system to the proportion of workers.
Failure. It's not a money.
It's an absolutely system failure, not a money. But the problem is no government will have the bottle to say we're going to abolish this and we're going to spend 4 years putting this right, but it's going to take time. But you will still have people on trolleys. You will still, until we get it right, but we will get it right. If you don't do that, I'll guarantee it's not going to matter who goes into power. Somebody will be sitting here with you this time next year, and there'll be a trolley crisis in Waterford and Cork and Dublin and all around the country.
Who would you like to see as Taoiseach before I let you go?
I'd be upfront with you. Like, I really don't know, to be honest with you. I got on well with Leo Varadkar. He was always good to me. I got on well with Micheál Martin and Mary Lou. They were always very kind, and to me, you could talk to him, have a chat with him, have a cup of coffee and so on. I think I think the three of them are very capable people. I really do. And we underestimate Mary Lou. I think she's a very capable person. If she was Taoiseach, but I liked Varadkar. I thought he'd done a wonderful job representing Ireland, And I was in many countries. I was with Simon Coveney a couple of times, and he's highly regarded around the world, Varadkar. There's no question about that. He
that
really
can be
is.
a rocky parish on.
If
you're seen to
and we spoke about that earlier on.
Yeah.
I think he represented the country fantastically well. I'm not saying that he will now be Taoiseach. I think it's unlikely. I think Fine Gael are doing the right thing. People don't want him in government, so they should go to opposition.
Okay, so no regrets from you anyway.
Absolutely not.
John, thanks a million for coming in.
A pleasure, Maria.
That's Minister of State John Halligan there. If you want to get in on this topic, 083 3333 975 or 051 87 or 846 123. I'll be back after these. You welcome back. Richie says, read the North Quays project looking from the outside. It seems to me, and I'm no third level educated person, that the only people that are making money are the companies and the people who conduct the study after study that then stalls everything on the minister or such ministers claim to have got it over the line. That is what Richie has to say. Pat says, hi Maria, great news for Waterford on funding for the North Quays. Would like to thank John Halligan for his efforts in this regard. Even in retirement, he still delivers for Waterford. Somebody else saying they'll miss John when he's gone. But on the other hand, somebody saying, well done, John, plenty of money for the North Quays, good news, but still no cath lab that you promised. And somebody else says, WLR seem to keep missing this huge point that Fianna Fáil categorically stated on doorsteps that they would not go into government with Fine Gael either, but you keep harping on about them not going in with Sinn Féin. Well, I suppose Sinn Féin would represent the real change that people are asking about. That's why they're mentioned in the same breath for much of the time. Now, everything in the news at the moment is about the coronavirus and face masks and trying to keep it out of the country and what we're going to do if it gets to the country. And Paul Kenny of the Haven, who's two Haven pharmacies, and he's on the line now. You're very welcome back to the programme, Paul. How are you?
Good, Maria. Good to talk to you.
Have many people been coming in looking for face masks?
There have been a lot of people looking for face masks. We did have some, and we somewhat rationed them because of the demand on them initially, but they're gone, as they are everywhere else in the country. The majority of the ones that were bought from us were bought by people who were posting them to family members in China. As it happens, the supply has got so bad out there now, and obviously the hysteria and the danger, obviously, that goes with the virus that's spreading around over there, that the demand on the mask was massive.
And is coronavirus just a really, really bad flu that is only really dangerous to vulnerable people? Or is it something else entirely? Because there seems to be I didn't normally get such a sense of panic and this worldwide thing with just the normal strain of flu that might come out.
That's right. It is another virus in the same way that the flu is. It's not related to it particularly, and it seems that it's more infectious than flu, and that you can pick it up a lot easier. But I agree with you. I think I hope I'm not eating my words on this now, but I think there is a little bit of panic and hysteria kind of associated with this. At the moment, they're estimating the mortality rate from the coronavirus as being about 2%. I suspect it's much lower than that because there's probably an awful lot more people in China that are infected that haven't been diagnosed, so that would reduce the mortality rate overall. But like 85 people have died in Ireland from the flu this season, and we have a vaccine here for that, and yet people choose not to get the vaccine, so I think obviously it's a fear of the unknown, and it is a very real thing that's happening. There are people dying from it for sure. But I think maybe it just needs to be tempered a little bit with common sense,
And you can, I don't get this either. You can test positive for it, but you don't actually have it. You don't get it yourself. Is that right, or? Or does that mean that
you can be a carrier for it? But I think what you might be talking about there is the incubation period. So yes, you can have it and not present with any symptoms. So it can take up to 14 days before you present with any symptoms. But you
will get it. You will have the symptoms eventually.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could test positive for the virus, although not have any symptoms. But that would really that's obviously only going to happen if you have encountered the virus in the previous 14 days, which would only be the case if you've recently come from China, or you've recently been in contact with somebody who's been from China. It is only transferred from person to person. It's suggested, I don't know again how long it can survive kind of on countertops and things, but it's suggested like an hour or two at most. But, regular household disinfectants can kill the virus. So, if your hand hygiene is really important, particularly if you're working in environments where, you might encounter the virus, like, pharmacies or doctors' surgeries or hospitals or what have you. But hand hygiene and as the regular, household disinfectants can kill it. So, the HSE advice on face masks, which I suppose we started talking about initially, at the moment is to not bother wearing them unless you have encountered it. So they're really only advising it if you think you've encountered the virus, and it's to prevent you spreading it from yourself to others. That if you haven't encountered the virus, there isn't any advice. The advice is to not wear the masks.
So anyone sort of panic buying them who isn't sending them to China is like wasting their time, really.
Who knows? Who knows, Bria? Again, we're talking about the unknown somewhat, but I think all this advice and information is readily available. If anybody has a fear about anything, you can certainly go and talk to your local chemist who's behind the counter as usual. So and also again, consider flu vaccination. It is something that's real and is annual in this country and readily available everywhere from doctors and pharmacies and relatively cheap, and it could be prevented. So maybe there is a message to take away from this from the coronavirus scare for sure.
It's hard to believe really that there's a vaccine to prevent something and we're not all queuing up at the doors to get it.
Yeah. When the numbers getting the vaccine are increasing every year dramatically. I mean, it might be somewhat to do with the fact that pharmacies are doing them now. That we are accessible, but certainly the awareness is increasing. It is relatively good value, and the side effects. It's a really safe profile. The flu vaccine. There's a lot of scaremongery goes on surrounding it, saying people who say I got the vaccine and I got the flu from it, which isn't a thing. It's a dead vaccine. You can't get the flu from the vaccine, but it doesn't protect you for 3 weeks. So sometimes you can pick it up in the meantime, or say if you were unwell getting the vaccine, obviously it would prolong a recovery from it. But I mean, I get it every year, and it's literally it's the jab in the arm, and I don't even remember that I've had it later that day. It's a really safe thing. I don't understand why more people don't get it. It's I think people who haven't had the flu maybe don't know, how sick you can be from it. It is a word that's probably bandied around a bit.
I know people walking around saying, I have the flu, and I'm like, I've had the flu twice in my life, and I felt like I was going to die, and I didn't care.
10 days you'll never get back, so why not just get the vaccine every year, so.
I agree with you, and maybe you'll be able to restock on the face masks when everybody stops panicking. Paul, absolutely, thanks a million for talking to me.
Yeah, nice talking to Maria.
See you, bye-bye. That's Paul Kenny there of Haven Pharmacies in Tramore. Do you think there's been kind of too much panic about this coronavirus, or are you worried about it in any way? Or did you go out and buy a face mask on the off chance that you might come across people? Let's have your thoughts on that on 083 3333 975 or call 051 846 123. Back with more after these. You are welcome back to the programme. It's Maria in for Damien. By the way, coming up later on in the programme, we're going to be talking about those proposals to redevelop the site of Ryan's Pub in Ballybeg. It sounds, on the face of it, it sounds very good to me. 45 apartments and commercial space as well. 25 two-bedroom apartments, 14 one-bedroom apartments and 6 studio apartments. And the local shop could move into the unit as well. But there is some concerns about it, so I am going to be talking about that. But if you're in that area, I'd like to know your thoughts on the proposals. Would you welcome it, or do you think no, it's completely the wrong thing? Let's have your thoughts on that as well on 083 3333 975. You can use that to WhatsApp as well if you want. John spoke very well this morning. Sorry, Caroline, your text came in a bit funny. You might look at it again because your phone is obviously doing the same thing to you that my phone does, is that as soon as you press send, it just changes what you've just texted, and because I can't actually make sense of it. But this one says, housing health takes a long time to fix. If only Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were given enough time in the past. Do I detect a note of sarcasm in you there? Eileen says, Maria, 6 street lights out in Dominic Place area last week. ESB fixed that on Tuesday last night. The same 6 out again. We can't see our footpaths again going into our homes. You just have to get back onto them, whoever you got onto the first time round, to get them to fix it, and just keep after them, because that's the way to get things done, is just haunt people so that they dread the sound of your voice on the phone and go, oh Jesus, here's this woman again. Go out and fix those things just to get rid of her. So that's the best thing that I can suggest that you do there, Eileen, and I hope it gets sorted for you pretty soon. Now, I have in the studio with me Geraldine Sutton, who's Principal Social Worker of the Safeguarding Team in the South East. You're very welcome to the programme, Geraldine.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on.
You're more than welcome. Some interesting statistics thrown up in the study that you did, that 80% of adults haven't thought or talked about where they'd like to be cared for if they become seriously ill. I think there's an element of, like, I'm not going to fly in God's face here now, but I'm going to be well enough alone about that. But these things are important, aren't they?
They're very important. And I suppose if you look at it from both sides, I suppose for the person who has ended up in hospital, maybe is very unwell, has had a serious incident, and decisions need to be made about whether they can get to go home, whether they need long-term care, what type of support hours do they need. And I suppose a lot of times families are left making those very, very difficult decisions. There's sometimes a bit of disagreement between families, and I suppose a lot of that kind of comes to us in the Safeguarding team. So really, Safeguarding Ireland are trying to tell people, future-proof. Think about what you want, express those wishes, get them down on paper, so when the difficult times ahead might come, might never come, there's a plan in place that people will know your wishes. So I suppose like 80% of all adults haven't thought, and only 5% have documented. It's just huge, really, it is. But as you said, people don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. What I'd be encouraging people to do is to start thinking about the smaller decisions now. Nobody's asking somebody at any age in their life, do you want to be in a nursing home? Everybody says no. So it's not a decision you're just going to make and start putting into place. But actually, if you think about, right, well, if I can't, if I lose my mobility, or even it's reduced, and I have only 2 bedrooms upstairs and a kitchen and a living room downstairs, where would I put a bed? So that's a decision that anybody at any stage could say, OK, I'll think ahead. Maybe it would be good to have room downstairs. So that's something you could think about. And I think the smaller type decisions about maybe the physical decisions you need to make, decisions about your finances, they will lead on to making it easier to make the bigger decisions down the line.
And you have to think of things as well, like enduring power of attorney, which is quite hard to get sometimes if people wait too long and the person isn't in a fit state to give their consent for it even. You know, it's...
Absolutely.
You might just explain a little bit about what that is for people who don't know.
Yeah, and that's a very, very good point. And I suppose a lot of times as social workers and doctors and nurses in hospitals, when they go to the family members and they say, well, what would your mum want? What do they want to do? Oh, they say, you should have gotten enduring power of attorney, or in this situation, enduring power of attorney would be very helpful. So what it means is, while you're well, now, it doesn't have to be physically, or people with dementia can actually make an enduring power of attorney before they lose their decision-making capacity. So there is a point in your life where you won't be able to appoint enduring power of attorney.
Yeah, they have to be in a position to give the
consent. So what happens is you would make a decision that I want to appoint a trusted, a loved one, a relative, a really good friend. It's somebody that you trust to become power of attorney should you lose your capacity. So I could appoint somebody today to be power of attorney for me. It may not kick in for another 30, 40 years, whatever that time lapse is. And really, it's only comes into effect when your capacity is gone.
I presume you can rescind that. If I gave you mine and we fell out, I could go, well, I'm not having her in charge of me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there is even, I suppose, even when it does kick in, there is a legislation around it, I suppose, that people have to behave in a certain way and they have to respect the wishes and they can use the money to care for the person. So if you've appointed somebody to mind your money, They can't then go off and book a holiday for themselves, but they can do up your house to make sure that you get home. They can pay your nursing home fee. They can invest that money to make sure that you have enough money.
I think it's one of the best things you can do to prepare for the future. If you only do one thing, I'd nearly say do that. Because, and you mentioned family there. My own mother got she was quite ill for a couple of years, and I consider myself lucky that I was the only one that had to make all the decisions, because like my father's dead and my brother's dead, so it was just me.
Yeah.
And I always find when there's siblings involved that everybody wants the best for Mammy and Daddy, but everybody has a different opinion on what that is. And some family members are suspicious because, well, why do you want enduring power of attorney? Like, why should it be you? And you'll have control of everything and you can do this and you can do that. I consider myself lucky that I didn't have that, but it can be quite a minefield for families.
It is, and I see it every day in work. And again, people are under huge pressure. People are, there's been an incident or there's been an episode for their loved one, and suddenly there's a doctor looking at them saying, well, what do you want to do next? And as you said, everybody has different views, and none of those views are often wrong whatsoever. They're just a different way of looking at things, and people would see maybe the capabilities of their older person as better than other people would. And again, it's, I suppose, our societal views of older people. And I suppose one thing that I would be saying is that you have the same right to make a decision at 18 as you do at 80. You might have to make it a little bit different. You might need to make a different type of decision, but your capacity rolls on right up until the day it's gone. So that decision-making thing is very, very important, and for people to respect the wishes of the older person when they get to that point. So laying down those decisions while you're well, it helps families. So when that argument comes between two family members who've never got on and suddenly they're thrown into making a really difficult decision, they can say, this is what Mam wrote down 10 years ago. She's checked it every year since. You can see the notes she's made, the little changes she's made as things have moved on for her. And this is what Mam wanted when she could make decisions. And that helps everybody.
And I think as well, if you do it when you yourself are younger, it takes that element of I'm being a burden on people, and that motivates the decisions that you make.
Yeah. And exactly, and we would see both sides of that, where older people won't ask their family to help because they don't want to be a burden. Whereas actually, and I'm glad you brought it up, because one of the main things I would think is if we start looking at managing our finances, at a certain stage in your life where you think, okay, I want to be financially secure for the future. So probably at 50, 60, 70, signing over everything to your family members isn't possibly a great idea for you unless you have supports in place, the enduring power of attorney, getting some legal advice around the decisions you're making sure that you have money that will bring you into the future. You may not need as much money as you did, you may have a different pace in life, you might have a different style life, but you will still need some money. It may be that, and I work for the HSC, I see the difficulties for people in terms of home support hours. There is a limited supply of home support hours going into people's home. So if you get 10 hours a week, say from the HSC, and another 10 hours paid yourself might be a great thing to do. So again, if you're looking at it when you're 30, 40 or 50 and saying to yourself, actually, I'm going to start putting money away in the eventuality of something going wrong, that's going to help your family as well. You'll still get your hours from the HSE, but you'll be able to pay some extra hours yourself as well.
And if people are thinking, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't even know where to start, the Irish Hospice Foundation have a form, haven't they?
Absolutely. This is a really, really good form, and I suppose it's called Think Ahead. There's a website called thinkahead.ie. You can download the form, you can complete it, you can store it, and you can revise it. And I suppose in that form, it's one document. You can put your personal information, emergency contacts, health insurance, medications, medical card number, cultural preferences, religious beliefs, advanced healthcare directive. So that's a really difficult one for people to talk about, is what do I want to happen in the case that I am very unwell. What decision do I want to be made around me? And there's no right or wrong decision, but putting it down on paper.
Is that do not resuscitate and things like that? Would that come under that?
Absolutely. And life-sustaining treatment. You can make those decisions. And there is a new Assisted Decision-Making Act coming. It's in law, but it hasn't been enacted yet. And I suppose when you make a future healthcare directive, it can be registered with them, and it's set in stone, but can be changed. And that's the most important thing, because how you feel now may not be how you feel in 10 years' time. And as life changes, we get more okay with things that happen to us than maybe we would have thought 10 years ago.
Just do yourself and everyone else a favour and get something down on paper, get something done. Geraldine, a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for giving me the time. I really
You're
appreciate it.
more than welcome. That's Geraldine Sutton there, Principal Social Worker of the Safeguarding Team in the South East. I'll be back with more for you after these. You are welcome back to the programme now. Sean Martin is the President of the Irish Postmasters Union and he's with Tramore Post Office as well, and he's on the line now. You're very welcome back to the programme, Sean.
Good morning, Marie. Thanks.
How are you?
Not too bad at all, and you?
I'm not too bad myself, but I'm sure hearing that or knowing that up to 400 post offices are in danger of closing in 18 months isn't good news. And people, you must have been heartened in the Red Sea poll or the research that they did, that 86% of people favour the government providing financial support to keep their local branch open.
Yeah, look, we're obviously frustrated and annoyed with both the inaction and probably action of the latest government over the last 9 years. Like, we spent a lot of time talking to all political parties. All political parties, bar none, would tell us that the post office is hugely valuable in communities, probably for two reasons. One being economic, in that the money that we hand out locally is actually spent locally, so that creates and sustains jobs locally. And also for social reasons, like it enables the most vulnerable in society to have a point of contact, to have face-to-face, and to be able to meet and greet other people. And I think that's important in society today. And
because it is a lifeline for a lot of people. And, you know, I was talking about this to Mary and Ollie on breakfast, that, you know, everyone, as soon as it's closing, everyone is complaining, but they mightn't have used it.
Yeah, that's an important point to make, Marie. I think the public have got to you know, we're into a new year now, and I think they should make a conscious choice, you know, that we buy Irish rather than buy foreign, that we shop local rather than buy on the internet, and that we support local services, including the post office, because it does do an awful lot of retail products. It has an awful lot of services to offer the public, and we need the public to support it. So, like, if you're coming up to pension age, we'd ask you to consider the post office. If you're paying your bills, we'd ask you not to pay them on direct debit, if possible, to pay them in your local post office. And when you're getting your foreign exchange, you know, to come into the post office, and we'll be glad to help you. I think it is important to say that the post office is hugely valuable in society, but unfortunately, even though every government party would tell you so, the unfortunate thing is that their actions and inaction actually cause us to be in the state that we're in, which is you know, the viability of the post office is at a crisis point. And inaction in the basis that there's a lot of government services we can do. We could do the motor tax, we can do driving licences, we can do form generation. Not only can we generate the form, but we believe we can actually populate the form because our computer systems are probably the best in the world. We can do the register of electors. And unfortunately what the government are doing, and we are state-owned, so we're there to deliver state services. And what they're actually doing is they're diluting the services that we actually have. If you look at, you know, they're coercing and probably encouraging social welfare customers to get their money in the bank. And we believe that's wrong, because you're asking the most vulnerable in society to pay to collect their money. And, you know, with Passport Express, while we were doing a great service for the last 2 or 3 years, they've now driven that online, and they've driven it online at a cheaper rate. That doesn't make sense from a company that owns the post office network to actually be driving away the people from it. It makes no sense at all to us.
And what could they give you that would make all the difference? Because, to be fair, they're not just dealing with the post office network, they're also dealing with the people that they work for, who are the likes of me and people, and you, and people listening to this, who might find it more convenient to get things done cheaper and get things done online.
We have no problem whatsoever with consumer choice, absolutely not. But we have a major problem where the government are directing and encouraging people elsewhere from their own state-owned post office network.
But what would be the one thing, Sean, if I said to you, you can pick one thing that the post offices can get that will make all the difference, what's your choice?
The most fundamental thing is the social welfare. Like, the foundation of the post office has been on the delivery of welfare through the network. And as I said, that's hugely important for communities, because the money that we hand out locally is spent locally. There was a report done in England about 5 or 6 years ago when they actually took social welfare away from the post offices over there, and it actually decimated some towns and villages in that they became sleep towns. In effect, all the businesses around it closed, and they now spent, over the last 5 or 6 years, they spent billions trying to regenerate the post office over in England. What we're saying to the government is, let's not make that mistake here. let's keep the post office a viable post office, viable on the basis that it's trusted. It's the most trusted financial institution out there. It's probably one of the last institutions out there that gives face-to-face service. And I think that's hugely important for society going forward. Like, the last thing I want my kids to be doing is growing up communicating with each other on the internet, because I think that may, stave up an awful lot of mental health problems, depression and isolation in years to come, and we'll end up paying for that. And I think you have a service now that is valuable, and as you said, the Red C poll said that 91% value the service in the community. 86% said they actually want to see more services being delivered through the post office network, and 86% actually said that if the government needed to support it financially, that they should do so. So that tells you, like, we've 1.5 million people coming through the post office network every week. So it is a relevant service to an awful lot of people. And what we're asking the government is, let's make us more relevant.
This will cheer you up before I let you go, Sean. It says, I regularly go to Tramore Post Office. Sean, Olive and the rest of the staff go above and beyond for all their customers. Super service always. Love the new location too. So thanks very much for talking to me, Sean.
It is important, Marie, to thank the customers that are actually using the post office, because without those customers we wouldn't be viable, because we are self-employed people. We don't get paid a salary. We live on transactions. And without that transaction, we won't be able to survive. So I would like to thank all people that support their local post offices throughout the country. It's hugely valuable.
Sean, thanks a million for talking to me.
Thanks, Marie.
See you, bye-bye. That's Sean Martin, President of the Irish Postmasters Union there. And we'll head to news now.